Ladies and gentlemen, it's the owner of the worst channel on YouTube and commander to the Legion of Deathheads, the world's wokest warrior, primitive-sided, toxic fanboy aligned with the like-minded, ToneDef rocking with you. I want to welcome one and all to the Clown World Review. Happy Zelda Day. It is February 21st of 2021. That makes 35 years since The Legend of Zelda first debuted on the NES. And man, I feel like an old fuck. Yeah, that's a long time ago. I still remember I just going to the video game store with my mom, and going and playing on the toys, and she goes to check out the Nintendo games. My older sister just got me one for my birthday. Belated gift, of course. My birthday is February 1st, and lo and behold, 3 weeks later, we would maybe not to the day, but close. We would stumble upon a game that would define my life, in a big way. A lot. Excuse me. It's very similar to how we may compare the lessons of Star Wars and Luke Skywalker. I've also learned many lessons from The Legend of Zelda, and yeah, 35 years now. It's just, I can't believe it's been so long, and my mom and I sat down to play that first game on the NES and maybe had a 3-day rental on it. And the next day, my mom went down to Kmart. She purchased the game, and probably about 4 or 5 months, we were just stuck on that. Every day I'd get home from school, she'd get off of work, and she couldn't figure out, she got through most of the game, but she could not figure out how to finally defeat Ganon. And it was yours truly who busted out those silver arrows and beat that first game. And I've been hooked since, I gotta say. And with the recent announcement of Skyward Sword through the Nintendo Direct on February 17th, that's just more to look forward to. But I'm not gonna lie, I thought we were gonna get a little more in the way of Zelda news. I was hoping to get some sort of collector's disc with a link to the past, Ocarina of Time, even Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, some of the bigger names. And they announced Skyward Sword, which is cool. It's not my favorite Zelda game, but it's something I definitely look forward to going back and playing again. I like the motion controls. I know that was a big controversy, but anyway, kind of rambling here. I wanted to go into an article I saw just kind of commemorating 35 years in The Legend of Zelda. I wanted to talk about that a bit. Maybe some more Zelda memories. If you guys have any, feel free to let me know in the chat. And then I want to talk about this Gina Carano situation a little bit once we're done commemorating Zelda here. Because up until I turned this stream on, I was actually listening to her interview over at the Daily Wire, and it's pretty interesting. Some things I want to touch on there as well. So if you guys don't mind. But let's go ahead and jump into this article here. And it's from Shack News. Headline is, "It's Dangerous to Go Alone, 35 Years of The Legend of Zelda." And where were you when you saw those words for the first time? I was in the video rental store. Where were you guys? And tell me some of your first experiences with Zelda in the chat as well. Shag News takes a look back at the NES classic that started it all, the Nintendo Entertainment System's The Legend of Zelda. There are video game franchises that are recognized around the world. Very few of them define gaming as everyone knows it today. The Legend of Zelda is one of those franchises. If Mario helped pioneer the side-scrolling platformer, The Legend of Zelda did the same for action-adventure games. Today, Nintendo's beloved adventure series celebrates its 35th anniversary. What made The Legend of Zelda such a phenomenon? How did it become what it is today? Let's look back at the original NES adventure and break down some of what made it such an incredible journey that still holds up to this day. And it does. I can go back and play that original game at any time. I was just playing it a couple of weeks ago, filming another video for the channel, actually. getting some footage from there. But the article goes on, The Legend of Zelda's appeal can be summed up in its opening introduction. The game begins with Link in the middle of Hyrule. The player is not prompted on where to go. They can explore the rest of the perilous landscape. However, there's a single cave. It's second nature today to enter that cave, but when this game first released on NES, it was only instinct that prompted players to enter. I gotta say, I remember first playing this game at, I mean, for as much as there is to figure out in Zelda, starting off on a screen and having a single cave, it's kind of a big red flag on where you might want to head first. I don't know if it was anything even less than second nature back then. This is where players meet an old man. Who is he? Where did he come from? How did he get where he is? Why does he have a sword? Why is he offering it? These questions are never answered. And again, I don't think I ever asked those questions, but I loved swinging that sword. That old man, I used to think too, because Link would grab the sword and then hold it above his head. I thought Link killed the guy. Unfortunately, Nintendo, they're not that ballsy. Some Kylo Ren, something kill the old guy at the beginning, but then maybe the franchise would suck. So anyway, the quote has become synonymous with gaming in the 35 years since they were first spoken. More than that, it seeped into the greater world of pop culture. It's been referenced in other games, television, merchandise, memes, and much more. They're the words that players would expect to hear when they embark on an epic adventure. And it's an epic adventure that awaits. The evil Ganon has abducted Princess Zelda and seeks to rule the world through the power of the Triforce. Only a young hero named Link has the power to stop him. In front of him is the world of Hyrule, a massive world unlike anything seen to that point. And of course, those words are, it's dangerous to go alone. Take this. And, those are some iconic words. And, Mario is definitely the face of Nintendo, but The Legend of Zelda is the heart. So the article goes on, before the open worlds of World of Warcraft, a Grand Theft Auto, or a Skyrim, there was the intimidating land of Hyrule. At the time, it felt never-ending. It felt so much bigger because in the early days of the NES, many of the features that players take for granted were not available. There was no fast travel, no waypoint system, and the world map was a primitive set of boxes. Hyrule was 16 blocks wide, 8 blocks high, and a total of 128 different areas, many of which could be explored out of the gate. And that's before even getting into the game's dungeons. Where would the players even begin? So, excuse me there. The answer was ultimately up to the individual player to an extent. The Legend of Zelda was open world, but you couldn't just start in Dungeon 8. You did have to progress to a certain point to get to certain dungeons. Like, you could jump in, do Dungeon 1, then jump over to Dungeon 3, go back later and hit 2 or something, but you couldn't, just jump into Dungeon 6, because even if you were skilled enough to get past the caliber of enemy, you wouldn't have certain items that were required to beat those dungeons. And that's in comparison to Breath of the Wild, where it truly doesn't matter. You don't even have to play the dungeons to beat the game. So, there was a bit of linearity to The Legend of Zelda. So I'm just saying, I don't know if you can quite compare it to the open world games of today, but yeah, for its time and for the hardware limitations, it was about as close as you can get. I think they could have come up with a different system for the items maybe than having them in the dungeon. Then you could have gotten more of that open world experience. But at this time, it was trial and error, too. There was never a game like The Legend of Zelda, so these were the blueprints for later games. Maps were included in North America. Miyamoto explained in the Zelda 30th anniversary interview, the maps included various hints, but to be honest, I thought it would be more enjoyable to play the game without any help. So we sealed the map with the message reading, you should only use this map and strategic tips as a last resort. I think I remember when we saw that in the box. My mom read it to me, and it's like, whatever, we popped it open right away. Like, and probably would. It probably would have been a better game. But you know what? I was 5 years old, and fuck them. I'll go on Reddit, right? I don't care. I have no shame looking for help in video games. Now, if it's a game that's blatantly obvious and points in the fit, like just shoves where to go in your face and what to do in your face, yeah, that can get a little annoying, but I like to be stumped to a point where I can't figure it out sometimes. I mean, I just think that's a sign of a well-made game, and I think they obviously put a lot of thought into it. So, but yeah, we ripped that thing at the last resort. And another thing, you kind of had to go through the paperwork in the first Zelda, the booklet and everything, because there wasn't any information in the game for certain situations. And if you didn't know we used to call the keys, or not even the keys, what were they? I can't even think of their name now. Maybe it was a keys. But the little Hershey Kisses things, that's what we still call them. Likes, choo-choo, whatever it is. So you kind of needed to go through the paperwork. And I mean, let's be honest. You've got a booklet that says use as a last resort, and then you have a 900 number that's like $5 a minute to the Nintendo Power Hotline, to the Nintendo counselors. Shouldn't that be the last resort? I mean, maybe should we pop open this little paper pamphlet that came with the game before we, spend the vacation fund on how to beat level 6? Thought? Maybe? No? Anyway, even with the map, though, getting around Hyrule, and excuse me, if you hear a little bumping, okay, I had my mic set up to a shelf. I don't mean to go off into a side trail here. Shelf has been up there for a long time, and the other day I'm walking in the room, and it just collapses. So I've been lazy. I got to put that shelf back up there. I don't know who hung it, but it's been up there for quite some time. But anyway, that's where I had the arm to my microphone. And that way you didn't hear any bumping noises when I'm on Mr. E. Tapakulian's Place to Be review 3 times a week. But since my shelf died, I had to put the boom over here on my desk, and you might hear a little bumping from time to time. So I apologize about that, but I will get that fixed. Just as right as rain, as soon as possible. Thank you. Back to the article. Even with the map, though, getting around Hyrule and finding the game's multitude adventure itself, it's hard to forget the first time getting caught in the repetitive loop of the Lost Woods. Yeah. Even trying to get out of there once you get stuck in there. Likewise, it's hard to measure the excitement from picking up the raft and reaching. Okay, so they're just going on about certain things. There's the dungeon. I wonder why they're not showing the swastika dungeon. Weird. Thought they'd want to show a screenshot of that. There's some weird game. Like, you could tell a lot of this game was trial and error. There's some weird things in here. But, I think we get the gist of the article. And it's back to what I was saying. It's just, this franchise is something special. So to hit 35 years, I mean, that's special to me. I never thought back then it would be just a lifelong thing, But I mean, every few years, I'm looking up Zelda news. I'm waiting for the new game. It comes out. Spend hours. I mean, and when I say hours, I mean probably hundreds of hours on each game, exploring, looking for little things. And they tell a lot of story through subtext in these games. So they leave a lot to the player to kind of put together and piece together and connect to other games. And that's a lot of it too, is just discussing the lore. Like, I'm not as good as some of these Zelda YouTubers on here, but I mean, if you are interested in the lore of the Legend of Zelda, you can always find Nintendo Black Crisis, Zeltic, some other great YouTubers on here, and they really get deep into some stuff that you might normally miss while playing the games. So, and then it's always fun to go back and play the game with that new perspective. So, you see here, we got a message in the chat here from Mr. E. Tapakulian. Hail, brother. I just tweeted out the stream. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, we're just kind of freestyling it today. So, nothing, no script to stick to, nothing big, just kind of honestly trying to get a little better at live streaming here so we can do this more often. And yeah. So, who listened to the Gina Carano interview today? Anybody? Just me? I'm about 2/3 through it. I suggest you go listen to it. It's free on YouTube now. It came out to Daily Wire members yesterday, so we heard a couple lines from it in the news then, but I feel bad for this girl, and that's one reason I love Nintendo. I'm seeing posts on Facebook that Nintendo is the Disney of video games, and I'd like to call BS on that. Nintendo may not be a perfect company, but when the Wii U failed, their CEO cut his own salary so he wouldn't have to lay off people at the lowest end of the company. They're not bullies. When you listen to this Gina Carano interview, you actually hear what kind of company Disney really is and the things they would do, the intimidation tactics, the mob-like tactics. So, and I'd like to compare those two companies, Nintendo and Disney, and I kind of did in one of my last videos discussing Netflix dropping, not even dropping, but they couldn't keep their loose lips shut long enough to put together a deal with Nintendo for a Legend of Zelda TV series, and they started leaking it out to the press like they do so well, and Nintendo, okay, you got to understand, the Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Brothers, those are the lifeblood of Nintendo. Pokemon. So, how these characters are portrayed, Nintendo takes very seriously, and especially after the 1980s Legend of Zelda cartoon, they've learned from their mistakes. And look at the Super Mario movie. They've made these mistakes in the past, so they don't want to rush anything. They want to make sure any moves they make are strategic. They want to make sure they're well thought out and a productive move. And that's something Disney doesn't do. I think by the firing of Gina Carano, they're proving what we already know, that their priority isn't storytelling. Like, hey, their priority is money. We know that. But what they're willing to do is put an agenda over their storytelling. And that's what they proved to us by firing Gina Carano, because there's no way to take her out of The Mandalorian now without it affecting the story, whether you recast her, whether you kill her off in between seasons, or she just went off to join some rebel faction over in this corner of the universe. It doesn't change the fact that she was one of the best parts of the show, and now she's gone and the show's lacking that. And the only reason she's gone is because the people at Disney don't agree with her worldview. So when I see posts talking about Nintendo is the Apple of the video game world, Nintendo is the Disney of the video game world, I mean, I don't think so. I think they're a better company than that. And they, again, not a perfect company, but they care about their employees and they understand people of different points of view. And when people try to make things political in Nintendo, they're usually the first ones to pull away. Like, that's not our brand, and that's rare. That's rare these days. I'd rather have someone take the stance in Nintendo than Nike or the NBA. So, but yeah, this interview, it just highlights what we knew about Disney. Agenda's their number one priority. Even I said money's their priority. It's not even money anymore. Agenda is their number one priority. Because even if they go bankrupt, our federal government isn't going to let Hollywood fail. It's too, they're too married to each other at this point, and they'd be subsidized by the BBC, and then it doesn't matter what they put on. It doesn't matter that they lose money because they're being subsidized by American tax dollars, which we all know are, we got to pay those. So, yeah, it's just, I don't know. That put me in, I was all Zelda, but I mean, I listened to that interview just a little bit before he came on, and it kind of just set me off. You know, it's really sad because I care about Disney too. Disney was a great company when I was growing up. And again, like Nintendo, not a perfect company, but they definitely weren't evil, or at least they didn't let their things show as bad then. And it's just kind of disheartening because, like The Legend of Zelda, like Star Wars, there are many lessons I learned from watching Disney films. And yeah, yeah, got a message. I'm taking a massive dump and backed up for 3 days, or I'd consider it. I don't have anything set up, and the Wi-Fi here is weak as fuck. That's from a friend here on the line on the internet. He's taking a massive dump, so he won't be joining me on this live stream, and that's okay. That's okay. After he probably listened to that Gina Carano interview, that would stop me up too. So, bro, I'm there with you. Thank you. I appreciate the thought, and you just work that out, man. I'm there with you in spirit. Pretend I'm holding your hand. No? Okay. Just got really weird. Like, how did we go from Zelda to, yeah, anyway. Guys, so, I don't know, maybe we should talk about the games a little bit. I just wanted to jump on that Gina thing real quick, because I mean, that really is what's in the news right now. Yeah, and it's kind of sad because it is Zelda Day. It's the 35th anniversary. It's May the 21st be with you. Does that work? It's important, you know. Because Zelda is one of those franchises that has, number one, withstood the test of time. They've refused to let outside politics and outside forces. And look, there are gay characters in Zelda, or at least heavily implied. There has always been diversity in Hyrule. But like true non-bigots that Nintendo are, like the true non-bigots that they are, it doesn't revolve the story. That you have Tingle, he's been, when did Majora's Mask come out? 1998, 1999. He was heavily implied to be gay then, and it was not, and this is a video game made for kids. It was never an issue because we're all just people living in this society. Tingle wasn't coming up telling you you're lesser than because of what I do in my bedroom. And as dumb as that sounds, we're living in a dumb world, and so many franchises have fallen victim to that. So, and I still fear it. I hope The Legend of Zelda never goes down that route. I hope Nintendo never goes down that route. You know, I still worry about Super Mario, Star Fox, Metroid, so many other games, but I think Nintendo's smart enough to know, and even Sega. Look at what Sega did with Sonic. And it's not even about, and the movie, not even about going woke here. They listen to their fans, which we got to start making a list of the, of our guys, of the people who still care about the fans, you know. I know for all of his faults, Zack Snyder, he listens to the fans. Colin Trevorrow, he listens to the fans. I feel bad. I'm talking about Sonic. I can't remember the director's name, but I do remember everyone freaking out about that weird looking Sonic. And what did they do? They fixed that, even at the expense of making any profit. They wanted to do right by the fans. That's called integrity, and it's something the Legend of Zelda franchise still maintains. So I hope that goes on for a long time. You know, let's talk about Zelda 2 for a bit. We talked about the first one on NES. Let's talk about the sequel. And I think Nintendo kind of had a sequel problem at first because, as I was saying, you know, The Legend of Zelda was the blueprint. You know, there wasn't anything like it before. So where do we go from here? And Zelda 2, I mean, when I say they had a sequel problem, I had the same feeling in my gut when I played Zelda 2 as when I played Mario 2. They were just two completely different games than their predecessors. And Mario 2 actually was. Mario 2 was a completely, I don't remember the name, but it was a Japanese game. And they just reskinned the sprites. That's why you had Peach, Luigi, Toad, and Mario, because in this Japanese game you had 4 playable characters, and that's why you're picking up roots and vegetables, and it almost felt the same way. Like, if you told me Zelda 2 was a different game in Japan, and I was lesser of any knowledge, I would believe you, because A, it takes on more of the RPG element. It's side-scrolling, which, you know, I like Zelda 2. I'm not going to bag on it like everyone else, but it's still the black sheep of the Zelda family. There wasn't any other games like this in the series. And I think it was kind of received that way too. Like, when the first Zelda came out, I remember it had that Tetris effect before Tetris. My mom was in it. My uncles were into it. Just everyone loved The Legend of Zelda. And then the second game came out, and it's just, that's okay. But I think one problem is it was way too hard. Zelda 2 was an extremely difficult game. And yeah, it's beatable, but I think I've beaten it 2 or 3 times in my life, and not once was I able to breeze through it. I mean, it takes work and dedication, and not all people want that when they're playing a video game. Some people want to sit back and just enjoy the game. In fact, that was my problem with the Nintendo Wii, because sometimes you just want to play a game. I don't want to jerk off the Wiimote for 30 minutes. I want to sit down and play a game. And Zelda, The Adventure of Link, that was, you're sweating playing that game. That had to be, these gamers who are into challenges and going through Breath of the Wild without taking any damage, that kind of shit. You go play Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, and don't take any damage. I'm not even going to Google it, because I know it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, you're lying. You're lying. Or you got a game genie. Zelda 2, it separates the boys from the men. And I don't meet many people that beat that game. So I don't think it deserves some of the hate it gets. I would definitely play a remake. I think they would nerf the remake a little bit and make it easier for everybody. But that game, it tempers you. You don't come out the same on the other end. Zelda, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, was the 3rd game to come out. And this was like a breath of fresh air. Where the first Zelda, I told you, it kind of had that Tetris effect. And then we had Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which everyone softened on. They're like, maybe this series isn't what I thought it would be. Because people were excited for Zelda 2 until they saw it. Especially the older players, the parents and uncles. And so A Link to the Past comes out, and it reinvigorates the franchise. I remember that's when my mom sat back down and started playing again, had her own profile. My uncles are asking me, how do I beat this? How do I beat that? And this is a game that does withstand the test of time, most definitely. The first NES Zelda, it's great. It's still playable. But A Link to the Past, it feels like you could be playing a 2D game made within the past few years. Still to this day, the story in it is wonderful. And it's the first Zelda series where we really had some kind of a storyline. Now, you had a little bit in the first and second Zeldas, and they were mainly told through text in the instruction booklets. But A Link to the Past, it's like it took everything from the first Zelda and just perfected it. You had the 2 worlds, the dark world, the light world. You had deception within the enemies. You had personality for Zelda, who in the first game, you only see her at the end, and she just spouts off a couple generic lines, but you get to know her a little more in this. And it introduced us to Zelda's Lullaby and a lot of the great songs from the Zelda franchise that have been remixed and used and just are synonymous. as great as Zelda is to games, the soundtrack is to the game itself. I mean, if you can't sit back and listen to some Zelda music, man, I feel bad for you because they're masterpieces, and A Link to the Past brought us a lot of that. So this game was incredible. And after that, of course, we had Link's Awakening, which came out on the Game Boy, and this was supposed to be a remake of the first Zelda. A Link to the Past is on the Super Nintendo. And you can also, if I'm not mistaken, you can purchase it off the Nintendo eShop on the 3DS, and then it's available on the Nintendo Switch with part of their Nintendo Online service. So yeah, but I would start, like, if you have a Super Nintendo Classic, anything like that. I mean, it would be on there. It was one of the bigger games for the Super Nintendo. I mean, it was great. Seeing the land of Hyrule in 16-bit for the first time, I mean, that was great. It just looked so much better. And again, for the style it is, the graphics still hold up. And they actually made a direct sequel to A Link to the Past just a couple years ago. I think in 2015 for the 3DS, they made A Link Between Worlds, which it's the same Hyrule as the Super Nintendo version. So once you play A Link to the Past, it's always worth checking out the other one day too. The Link Between Worlds. And that game's cool because obviously at that point they have 3D technology, and what they do is kind of mesh those for A Link Between Worlds. They allow you to go in between 3D and 2D, and it's kind of cool. It's kind of the gimmick of the game. So yeah, but so we have, and I know they've changed the Zelda timelines, but we did have a Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, and that was actually supposed to take place after A Link to the Past. I remember back in Nintendo Power in those days, they were saying that, and I always thought it was weird because in A Link to the Past, you would go in between the light world and the dark world through portals. And then for Link's Awakening, the story was Link was sailing back from the light world after defeating Ganon in the dark world on a boat. I'm like, I thought they were different realms. Now they're across the ocean from each other. So yeah. And then, of course, they went in and changed that later. But that's where Link's Awakening starts. Link's on a boat. There's a horrible storm. He gets washed up onto an island. And from there, he meets Marin and goes on a grand adventure, realizes the truth and what's an illusion in that game. And that's the last we heard from Zelda for a long time. I don't remember, 6 years, 8 years, something like that. But the next game to come out after Link's Awakening was the Ocarina of Time. And this game, it redefined gaming across the spectrum. Not even my favorite Zelda game, but it is a lot of people's favorite Zelda games. I know it got a perfect score for its time. It didn't necessarily age well. Those Nintendo 64 graphics are, and this is why I bring up A Link to the Past aging well, because A Link to the Past looks wonderful today. If you pop in that Nintendo 64 Ocarina of Time, it looks like shit. It looks like a bad acid trip. It's too pixelated and blocked up and bulky. At the time, it was cool because, again, laying the blueprints, and that's something Zelda does very well. What does a 3D Zelda game look like? How do you take this franchise that we know does phenomenally well in an overhead bird's eye view, not so well in a side scroller, but now we're at a point where we kind of have to take away that bird's eye view, and we kind of have to put them into a 3D environment. How are we going to make that successful? So I could understand the just the nerves of making this game. But it for its time, it was wonderful. And then they make the HD remake, they update the graphics, and it's still a wonderful game. A little bland, but for its time, like I said, it redefined the landscape of gaming. So many games have taken inspiration from Ocarina of Time and how they solved certain problems in the world of developing 3D games. And it was such a great game. They greenlighted a sequel, said it had to be made within a year because the Nintendo 64 only had so much life left on it. And we get The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which is, I like Majora's Mask more than Ocarina of Time. Now, you only have 4 dungeons, but they find creative ways to keep you occupied where the game, I mean, it feels a lot longer than, in my view. A Zelda game, the perfect Zelda game, has 8 dungeons. So to have half of that, I think Majora's Mask did a pretty phenomenal job. And that's another game I can pop in at any time and just get right into it. Now here's where we have the controversy. Now, I might be skipping a few Game Boy Advance games, the Oracle games. It's fine. Those are what they are. They're produced by Capcom, fine. But the next major Zelda title to come out, and where the controversy comes in, is the Wind Waker. I saw this game, I loved it. The first time I played the Wind Waker, I absolutely loved it. And this was for the Nintendo GameCube now. And so many people freaked out over the animated cel-shaded style. And I don't know who knows this or not, but they actually used a program called Maya to cel-shade the Wind Waker, and it's the same program. I don't know if they're still using it, but I know South Park was using that at the same time to cel-shade their graphics. The animation styles are actually fairly similar, and fans freaked out because they wanted, and we had just had 2 games in the likeness of Ocarina of Time, which being Ocarina of Time itself and Majora's Mask. Fans freaked out that it was a more animated style, and it sucked because this is one of the darkest games in the franchise, and it contrasts so well with the animated style. It just adds to it in a way, and it gives the game life in a way that more realistic Ocarina of Time style just isn't going to give you. And the expressions Link had, I mean, it was an amazing game. And this game, I think, probably holds up the best out of all of the older Zelda games. I mean, Wind Waker is a masterpiece. Again, it may not be a perfect game, but I love it. I don't mind there being differences in how you obtain the Triforce in this game. They talk about how the ocean was barren. I didn't think so. I was always finding stuff. I'm always occupied sailing across the Great Sea. So, because of this, and because of, I'd like to say this is like pre-Twitter Mob 2, who did this, okay? They complained about the Wind Waker so much that it caused Nintendo to change courses. They were going to create a Wind Waker sequel and give you 2 games in that style, how they did the Ocarina of Time series. But because fans complained, they reverted back to the Ocarina of Time, more realistic style. And look, I'm not going to shit on the Twilight Princess. I like the Twilight Princess. I don't think it's better than the Wind Waker. I don't. I even like Midna as a better sidekick, but the game is kind of bland. And if you want to talk about a bland, boring open world, that's Hyrule and the Twilight Princess. And I'm sorry, but it is. It's huge. There's some beautiful scenery, but there's nothing to do in Hyrule Field, and especially compared to the Great Sea. Ask the Cheese Gaming. What's up, buddy? Just popping in to say hail. So, yeah, again, I like Twilight Princess. I love it, but I don't think it was worth changing course. And I'm always going to wonder what that other Wind Waker game is going to be like. And I still think there's room for Twilight Princess. I think if they would have created 2 cel-shaded animated style Zelda games and then went back to the realistic style, it would have been a lot more welcoming. But because of this, we ended up with Breath of the Wild, which comes later down the line, and I think that was definitely worth it, just to get that game. But in between the Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild, we did get Skyward Sword, which was just announced as a remake. I'm looking forward to that game as well. Again, not the best Zelda game. There were the motion controls I didn't have as much of a problem with. You need rechargeable batteries though, because the Wiimotes eat through AA batteries, like Melissa McCarthy eats through a, a cake glory hole. I don't know. I just know she's hungry, okay? It's still early for me. Yeah, so get rechargeable batteries if you're playing it on your Wii or Wii U. The linearity, when done right, is okay. Wind Waker was a bit more open world. Twilight Princess was a very, very linear game where you had to do certain things in a certain order. Okay, so then I had kind of had my fill because Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, those are pretty linear too. It had been a while since we had a nice open world game, and I think that's one reason I enjoy the Wind Waker so much. We go to Twilight Princess, very linear. Then we go to Skyward Sword, and I mean, this is the most linear Zelda game, and any sense of exploration is missing from this game. And that's my favorite part of The Legend of Zelda, is going into the unknown, going into the wild, going in, not knowing what you'll find, but knowing you're going to find something. I love that sense. And the way Shigeru Miyamoto is able to capture that in a bottle and put it in these Zelda games it's remarkable. Again, no one else was doing this before. He was the pioneer for so many games that where you're now exploring in these vast, beautiful, and somebody would have created it, but who knows if it would have been as good. The imagination of Miyamoto is just amazing. But what's up, Franchise History TV? If you haven't, go subscribe. Franchise History, Mr. Steve Matt. Yes, sir. See, I don't mean to brag, but I have 83 subscribers, so I'm going to try to get some of them over to y'all's channels. You know what I mean? To get y'all up to my level. So, anyway, yeah, so that was my problem with Skyward Sword. It's a very interesting story. And what Skyward Sword is actually the beginning of the Zelda franchise. It takes us all the way back to where everything first started, the curse between Link, Ganon, and Zelda. So, I mean, the story is wonderful, but there's no exploration in that game. And I'll take motion controls as long as we get to explore and as long as our fate isn't so predetermined as it was in Skyward Sword. So if I had an issue with the game, that would be it. But I do look forward to the re-release coming out. Was it July 17th? Definitely July this year. I heard it's retailing for $60. I'm okay with that. Everything's so number one, video games honestly have not gotten that much more expensive through the years. So you got to give them love for that. I'll gladly pay $60 knowing that I'm going to have fun for hours on end. I easily spend at least $50 every time I go to the movie theater to watch a 2-hour hunk of shit. So to be able to sit down with a video game for a couple weeks here and play it, I'm okay with that. $60, I'm fine with that. It's better than EA coming out with half the game. You're like, well, if you enjoyed the demo, come buy this DLC and you can beat the game. Like, no, I'm okay with that. I'd rather purchase a game that I know I'll enjoy. And yeah, so, and then after Skyward Sword, it brings us to Breath of the Wild, which we're in the Wild era now. And I think Nintendo's doing a wonderful job. And we were talking about cel-shaded styles in the Wind Waker. Well, lo and behold, they revert back to that. Now it's less animated. It's actually almost like they took the style of the Ocarina of Time, the realistic looking Link, and then they took the animation style, the cell shading and everything of the Wind Waker, and they combined those for Breath of the Wild, and it's absolutely beautiful. It truly is a beautiful game. You know, Nintendo doesn't have the hardware of a Sony or a PlayStation, and they proved that you don't need it. Video games don't have to look completely real. You can have an animated aspect to them, and some video games honestly need that animated aspect, just like some movies and stories do. What they did with Breath of the Wild's graphics is fantastic, and if it's taught us anything, the cell shaded style of graphics, it's that it's going to age well. If you take the original Ocarina of Time, if you take the original Twilight Princess, if you take the original Skyward Sword, and compare those to the Wind Waker, some games made before, some games made after, you compare them to the animated style of the Wind Waker, they all look like crap. So, you know, when the mob comes after you to change time, maybe if you know what you're doing, you know, let's not always cave to them, because I think the Wind Waker is a good example of why they were going in that style. And now they've gone back to that style. So Breath of the Wild will still look good in a few years, unless we're all in holograms by then in the Mark Zuckerberg cube. Breath of the Wild's going to look great. And Wind Waker's still going to look great. So, and what Breath of the Wild did, again, you know, how the first Zelda on NES redefined gaming, and how the Ocarina of Time then redefined 3D gaming. And not alone, you know, Super Mario 64, Resident Evil, you know, there were some great games in that era, but Breath of the Wild has redefined open world gaming, and I didn't like many open world games. Assassin's Creed gets boring. Mr. Etapakulian says, I'll gladly pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today. Now I'm hungry. It's like, all right, dude, but I'm putting 25% APR in that burger, so I don't know if it's worth it. Isn't that how we got into this mess in the first place? Like, our GDP to debt ratio is through the roof, and it's all because of this asshole giving the entire country the idea that it's okay to get a burger today, pay him tomorrow. Well, fuck yeah, I don't even remember his name. Is that Mr. Magoo? What's his name? Slap that bitch in the mouth. My burger, dude. I don't know. I lost track now. Listen, don't cave into the mob. Zelda knows what they're doing. Wind Waker looks great. Breath of the Wild's going to look great. It redefined the industry. I read an article at some point that said I never knew video games had me in handcuffs until Breath of the Wild set me free. When I'd go play Assassin's Creed, it would get boring. I wouldn't care about these. You know, if you're going to put side quests in your game, which if you're making a game, there should be, you got to make the people care about doing the side quests. And a lot of Assassin's Creed was boring. Same thing with GTA. Some of it's fun. Some of the side quests are really boring. Zelda does a good job of filling up the entire map. I mean, they hide 900 Korok seeds. There's 120 shrines. I think it's like 136 with the DLC. 120 shrines, 4 dungeons. I mean, this map is packed with things to do. There's constantly something. I'll say, okay, I'm going to go head over to Lon Lon Ranch, go check out the ruins over there. And I get distracted by 6 or 7 different things on the way, just trying to get there. So the way they're able to just capture that magic, and the paraglider giving you the ability to climb anything and then you can just paraglide your way down, is something I didn't know I wanted in a video game. It's something I didn't know I wanted in a Zelda game, and now I can't imagine a Zelda game without it. It sucks. I go to play an older game and I can't paraglide. And you know, we already have games taking that. So, Breath of the Wild, I mean, I've put in about 600 hours on this game so far, between the regular and master mode versions. I still haven't 100%ed it. I've played through the game a few times, but I don't like to 100% games. It's just, I've done it in the past. I don't like the feeling of turning on a video game and there's literally nothing to do. So, And after Breath of the Wild, I mean, I could keep talking about Breath of the Wild, but we got Age of Calamity, which recently came out. I actually have a couple videos on that you can check out. Now, this wasn't, I didn't include the first Hyrule Warriors, but I'm going to include this just simply because of the story. This wasn't a Legend of Zelda game. This is a Hyrule Warriors game, which happened to have a story that directly connects to the era of the Wild. And even saying directly is loose because they create an alternate timeline for this where the good guys win at the end. I kind of didn't like that because we were under the impression the game would. Nope, nobody promised it would be a direct sequel, but it was heavily implied it was a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. And it's like, okay, we're going to see how the Great Calamity happened. We're going to see everything that was left unexplained in Breath of the Wild, or everything we wanted to see that was left up to our imagination. We're going to see how this happened. Almost, like Revenge of the Sith, And that wasn't it. We added an alternate timeline where the good guys won, and it was okay. It was a fun game to play. It was an interesting story, which brought more personality to Zelda and to the characters than I've seen in any other Zelda game. And I hope that's something they carry with them into the future games going forward. But yeah, I wish the story would have, and in a way it will, because we have some of the combatants from Breath of the Wild travel to this alternate timeline to help them, and then they travel back to the main universe. So we have some semblance of this alternate timeline in the actual Breath of the Wild universe, and we may see that in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. But I wish we had more lore and more to speculate on from the actions of Age of Calamity for the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which any update on that, we're not going to get till later this year. Shigeru Miyamoto actually mentioned during the Nintendo Direct on the 17th, 4 days ago now, that they ain't telling us shit. And I'm sure they have some stuff they can tell us, but I'm hoping when they give us information later this year, a release date's going to be along with that. I don't think we're going to get the sequel to Breath of the Wild anytime this year, but I'm hoping. Now, they dropped Breath of the Wild, what was it, March 2017? So Nintendo doesn't always necessarily drop their games around Christmas time. They're major titles. I'm hoping maybe sometime around this time next year, late February, maybe late March, April, that we might get the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Nintendo does have a goal of releasing at least one Zelda game every year for the Switch. If you haven't noticed, that's why we got Breath of the Wild in 2017. I don't remember what was in 2018. Maybe Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition or something like that. 2019 gave us Link's Awakening. 2020 gave us Age of Calamity. 2021's giving us Skyward Sword. Will that Breath of the Wild sequel be 2022? I hope so. I hope it's not. Something else Zelda's notorious for is delaying their games, which in the end pays off because they want to make sure it's right. But we've seen these games, and it's not always because of the work either. Sometimes it's because a new console's coming out and they want to save it for the new console, which is shady. That's one thing I do not like that Nintendo does. If you promise a game for a console, it needs to be on that console and not a cross console. Create a port later on or something, but plan better. If you need one of your Wii U games for a debut Switch game, then you failed to plan. Anyway, as long as they don't delay it, I'm hoping this time in 2022 we'll have that Breath of the Wild sequel. And I mean, then expect a flurry of videos because this is going to be my first real Zelda game that I get to delve deep into and unpack and, really explore with you, the deaf heads. So, I want to thank everybody for joining me. Mr. E. Tapakuian, thank you as always, sir. Steve Mack with Franchise History TV, thank you, sir. Ask the Cheese Gaming, hail, brother, thank you for stopping by. Just trying to up my live stream game a little bit, get a little better, and yeah, this hour went by quick, so I want to thank everybody who listened in, who stopped in to say hi. If you're listening after the stream, drop me some love in the comments. Let me know what you're doing for the 35th anniversary of Zelda. When do you think we're going to get that sequel? What's your favorite Zelda game? Don't be shy. Anyway, that's it for today, everyone. Thank you. I love you all. Peace out. Solo lost money.